could hardly move.
Thanks for tuning in to the Dinosaurs Lately podcast, the dinosaur podcast that features periodic updates recapping the latest news on the dinosaurs. My name's Ryan Rogers, and this is the podcast that targets a type of dinosaur and tries to catch you up on everything that's been published on them lately. Welcome to the 10th of these interstitial episodes I've created to keep up with all the dinosaur news, even when I'm not publishing new episodes of the Juras-Sick Park-Cast. I hope it helps you feel more up to date. Welcome to episode 10, Stegosaurs, recorded on May 10th, 2026. Happy Mother's Day! Hi, Mom. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail, S-N-A-L-E. You can check out his incredible albums on Spotify and Bandcamp. Snail's third album is out now. You can find it on Spotify and Bandcamp too. It's called Toy and Bee. And today's intro is Rosie Girl, and the outro is I Wanna See a UFO from Snail's brand new third album, Toy and Bee. Before we get into the thick of things, first, I put together a little PDF on ankylosaurs. If you'd like a copy, just send me an email and I'll forward it to you. No charge. It literally costs you nothing to drop me a line and ask for it. It's ryansrogers@gmail.com. Second, if you'd like to request a particular family of dinosaurs to cover for an upcoming episode, please do. I've got an informal schedule I'm keeping, but I can take requests. And third, Happy Mother's Day once again. That's it. All right, so let's get started. Stegosaurs are my favorite dinosaurs. Their heads are strange, insanely small, weirdly narrow, and with a famously walnut-sized brain case. Their necks are weird, armored with chainmail-like series of osteoderms protecting their jugular veins, and the lengths of their necks are, spanned a few different forms as well, which is really weird. They came in lots of sizes, but our big favorite, the Stegosaurus itself, was really big, maybe 30 feet long, the length of a bus, and it was about maybe 1,500 pounds. Probably a lot more. His posture was almost triangular. The rear legs were so much taller than the forearms, creating this steep mountain rising over its hips, which is like more than 10 feet high. The height of a common room might be 12 feet high, so, the Stegosaur wouldn't fit in a common room. And that's not even considering the most iconic piece of all, the massive keratinous plates hopscotching all along its neck, back, and tail. The largest plates rose more than 2 feet above its hips in a square area upwards of 6,000 centimeters, about the size of a small bedside table. And there were dozens of these plates sprouting out of its skin, though they were not physically connected to the spine itself. And then there's the lengthy, flexible tail that I'm told could whip around. And at its tip were 3-foot-long tail spikes, each the length of a crowbar, flashing and scraping its maneuverable strikes if it so wished. Stegosaurus is one of the first dinosaurs we learn about as kids. It's the dinosaur starter pack: Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Brontosaurus, and Stegosaurus. And probably Pterodactyl and Plesiosaurus and the woolly mammoth. We don't know any better than that when we're, in the dinosaur starter pack level. But because we learn about Stegosaurus at such an early age, we sort of take it for granted. It's almost familiarized or normalized as an easily recognizable quote-unquote dinosaur. But it's anything but common. And to this day, it's still riddling paleontologists with its challenging features. This episode, we're talking about what's new about some of the coolest dinosaurs that there ever were. So we're starting in the Middle Jurassic, about 168 million years ago, in what is called the Bathonian Age. Our first article is a new stegosaurian dinosaur with a remarkable dermal armour from the Middle Jurassic of North Africa, published in the journal Gondwana Research in January 2024. The new stegosaur is named Thyreophora atlasicus, whose name derived from Thyreos, which is Greek for an oblong shield that was used by Hellenistic armies and later adopted by other peoples, referring to the osteoderms of the specimen, and Sauros, which is also ancient Greek for lizard, and Atlasicus refers to the Atlas Mountains in Morocco of North Africa. So this is the Atlas Mountain shield lizard. The holotype HIIUCBN00, housed at the University of Hassan II, was uncovered from the Elmer's 3 formation. It's comprised of a partial skeleton including 9 vertebrae, 21 dorsal ribs, 6 armor plates they call dermal elements, and a limb bone, possibly a fibula, which are all believed to be from a single individual. Thyreosaurus was compared against other Moroccan stegosaurs like Adraticlet, and the features on the ribs suggested that this animal had a narrow rib cage, indicating, quote, that the specimen belongs to a medium to large size stegosaur, which has been interpreted as, quote, an adult individual who did not reach its maximum body size, which they estimate to be about 6 meters or 20 feet long. The authors say it had, quote, remarkable dermal armor consisting of, quote, thick subovate to subrectangular shaped osteoderms, which has, quote, asymmetrical texture on their sides, one roughly ornamented with small pits and fiber bundles, the other with well-marked cross-hatched patterns. These features are, quote, clearly different from that observed to date in other stegosaurs and ankylosaurs. When the authors put Thyreophora through a phylogenetic analysis machine, the results say that it clusters as a dacentrurian stegosaur, most closely related to Adriticlet and Dacentrurus, and they hope that it may provide some, quote, insight into the early evolution of stegosaurs in the Middle Jurassic of Africa. The armor plates, though, are the most interesting feature. They range in size from 5 to 30 centimeters in length, and they are, quote, unique among Thyreophorans, or Thyreophorans, however you pronounce it, in having an asymmetrical ornamentation, with one side showing an irregular surface with small pits and fiber bundles, while the other is characterized by an interlocking texture. This cross-fiber texture is documented in other osteoderms from non-stegosaurian Thyreophorans, which means ankylosaurs like Antarctopelta, Edmontonia, and Patagopelta in particular. And these textures are found at the base of these osteoderms. And stegosaurian plates are different. They vary symmetrical texture on both sides, consisting of a rugose and pitted base, irregular flat lateral surface provided with vascular grooves, and a frayed texture with deep furrows towards the distal edges. What does that mean is that Thyreosaurus has features more similar to ankylosaurs than to stegosaurs. The authors are suggesting the asymmetric ornamentation in Thyreosaurus suggests a recumbent orientation of the plates, with the sides strongly ornamented with a cross-fibered texture as the ventral side. In other words, the plates were flat across the hide of the dinosaurs, not sticking up like Stegosaurus. So here's an early stegosaur from Morocco that has unusual plates, and the anatomical and histological approaches the authors took to interpret these plates, quote, support that these osteoderms were not arranged erect, but rather recumbent on the dorsum of the animal in life. The nature of the orientation of these osteoderms appear highly unusual and are therefore different from those known to date for stegosaurs. That makes this a very interesting stegosaur and news item. Staying in the Middle Jurassic in northern Africa, specifically the Atlas system of Morocco, the next paper is New Dinosaur Track Sites from the Middle or Late Jurassic of Msemrir, published in the Journal of Historical Biology in January 2026. In Morocco, there are continental deposits known as red beds, which are famous for their abundance of vertebrate and invertebrate body and trace fossils. While searching through the Msemrir region of the Central High Atlas, which is a 13,000 plus high mountain range, which in this particular locality is a chalk mass morphologically dominated by tabular zones or plateau, surrounded by gorges and canyons. The authors say that they have come across, quote, new ichnological sites in the upper part of the Tuluget Formation, which is dated to the late Bajocian, early Bathonian ages in the Middle Jurassic. Quote, these ichnocytes are dominated by dinosaur tracks, mainly from theropods, and by tracks of a quadrupedal dinosaur, possibly a stegosaur or sauropod, often associated with invertebrate trace fossils. So the possible stegosaur footprints are distributed over 3 slabs, likely of the same sedimentary unit, including 5 manus and 2 pez tracks. The manus tracks are, quote, oval to kidney-shaped, measuring 10.1 to 32.73 centimeters in length, and 10.0 to 48.76 centimeters in width, lacking distinct claw marks. Pez tracks are generally subcircular or also lacking distinct claw marks, with average dimensions of 18.28 to 66.62 centimeters in length and 54.93 to 49.57 centimeters in width. So, in smaller dimensions, these handprints are between the size of a ceramic tile you'd use for your washroom to upwards of a legal sheet of paper, and the feet are bigger, about the size of a suitcase. The authors say, quote, the footprints studied lacked sufficient diagnostic characteristics for definitive ichnotaxonomic attribution, but they show, quote, notable similarities with stegosaur tracks documented from the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. Finding stegosaur tracks here isn't too surprising because other stegosaur tracks are known from Morocco, including the ichnogenus Deltapodus and Stegopodus, and, quote, stegosaur skeletal remains have been described from Morocco as well. They don't rule out that these could be sauropod tracks, but quote, because of the poor preservation and absence of unequivocal anatomical features diagnostic of both stegosaurs and sauropods in the isolated Get2S type tracks, we assign these tentatively to quadrupedal dinosaur tracks indeterminate. The results of this paper suggests that this paleo environment was an anastomizing channel which is a new word for me. This means it was probably a network of multiple interconnected deep and narrow river channels that divide and reconnect and were separated by stable, vegetated, and erosion-resistant islands. These systems are, quote, relatively static, low energy, and often occur in areas with low slopes. Quote, ichnological analysis reveals a highly diverse tetrapod fauna within the deposits, reflecting significant ecological complexity and varied interactions between organisms and their sedimentary environment. There are traces from small theropods, invertebrate ichnofauna like arthropods and other crawling, burrowing organisms, and evidence of a complex food web including herbivorous dinosaurs and crocodilomorphs. Quote, the abundance of fossil wood throughout most of the formation's stratigraphic levels either indicates a more extensive vegetation cover in the study area during the depositional period or transport from adjacent highlands during flooding. Other plant fossils have been found but require further analysis. If these fossils truly represent a local flora, they could have provided a suitable habitat and food source for animal communities and herbivorous dinosaurs such as stegosaurs or sauropods. The authors wrap up the way many authors do, suggesting that, quote, further exploration of the site is strongly recommended to further precise our picture of this assemblage, which could include the discovery of skeletal remains supporting or correcting the proposed interpretations. So they're basically like, here's our ideas, take it or leave it. The next article takes another crack in trying to conclude what the function of the plates on a stegosaur's back were. The article, The Function and Evolution of Stegosaur Osteoderms and Hypothesized Sexual Dimorphism in Hesperosaurus, is in preprint since April 2025, waiting for peer review. Hesperosaurus is a late Jurassic 16-foot-long Kimmeridgian stegosaur from the Morrison Formation that was named in 1985, and there are a variety of specimens to investigate if you were so inclined, which these authors are. The authors recall stegosaur plates have been hypothesized to perform a multitude of functions, including thermoregulation, to help this huge animal shed heat in the Jurassic atmosphere, provide defense from voracious predators like Allosaurus, and deliver sociosexual signals to attract mates. These authors stress the importance of, quote, considering more than just defense, while also considering evolutionary trade-offs. For example, there appears to be a functional trade-off of reduced osteoderm strength with increased thermal capacity as vascularity of the bone increases. So the authors considered multiple functions of the plates, including, quote, sexual display, combat, defense, and thermoregulation, and that the relative importance of the plates could also, quote, vary across time and space between sexes and across different regions of the body. For example, the gular ossicles, plates, and thagomizers. In other words, there are a lot of variables and a lot of hypotheses, and there's very little that can be said conclusively about what these plates were for. Some people say there are great mysteries in the Sphinx or the Mona Lisa smile, but stegosaur plates is way better than both of those times 10 because the riddle has a stegosaurus in it. And to that, the authors say, quote, as such, re-examining the evidence for sexual dimorphism in the plates of Hesperosaurus is worthwhile. One observation among the many, many observations they report is a consideration that males might have had wider plates and longer tail spikes than females if they were used for sexual display, because the males might have developed them earlier ontogenetically for the purposes of intrasexual combat, not just defense against predators. Quote, it is not unusual for males to first compete against each other before displaying to attract females, they suggest. Ultimately, this big study leads to this. Quote, we propose a model of stegosaur osteoderm evolution that originates from calcium storage and is exapted into defensive ossicles, scutes, and spikes. Exapted is a word that describes a body structure that is co-opted for a function other than the one it was originally evolved for. For an example is a fish's fins, which were evolved for swimming, but then further evolved into legs for walking, for like you and me. Another example is feathers, which were not originally evolved for the purposes of flight. It was just a fantastic adaptation, one awesome day for a very lucky group of theropods. In the same way, the authors are suggesting that stegosaur plates began as calcium deposits, evolved into defensive ossicles, and then, quote, further exaptation through sexual selection is predicted to correlate with 1, the differentiation of plates from the thagomizer, and 2, the unusual chiral asymmetry in the 2 rows of staggered plates in Stegosaurus and Hesperosaurus. They believe the plates likely adapted for visual display, while the spikes were possibly for male combat and defense. Quote, male osteoderms are then driven up to a physiological environmental upper size limit, while female osteoderm size is determined by predation pressure. The authors further hypothesize that, quote, more intense predation pressure may correlate with larger bodied taxa, more open habitat, more spine-like processes in plates, the presence of gular ossicles, and or longer tail spikes. So they imagine sexual selection, predation pressure, and even thermoregulatory demands could work to increase or decrease the magnitude of sexual dimorphism in osteoderms. Quote, in our hypothetical model, Hesperosaurus would be predicted to show high levels of sexual dimorphism in osteoderms. The prediction is based on its 1. Smaller size, 2. Wetter, more vegetated habitat, 3. Apparent lack of gular ossicles, and 4. Rounder plates than in Stegosaurus. Stegosaurus, on the other hand, would have reached larger sizes, lived in lower latitudes, in drier climates, and had more triangular, rectangular, or spine-like plates, as well as gular ossicles in some instances. So they conclude that these plates were likely doing all kinds of things and used for many purposes throughout the evolutionary course of Stegosaurs, and their theories correlate specifically why Stegosaurus had plates of a particular nature and Hesperosaurus had different shaped for another nature. Quote, overall, it seems that Thyreophoran osteoderms adapted for defense and then became co-opted for sexual display and combat in later Stegosaurs and Ankylosaurs. The next article, New Insights into the Phylogeny and Skull Evolution of Stegosaurian Dinosaurs, an Extraordinary Cranium from the European Late Jurassic, published in the journal Vertebrate Paleontology in May 2026, which is like now. This study describes, quote, the most complete Stegosaurian skull from Europe in a new phylogeny. The aims of this study are to 1. Provide a detailed description of the extraordinary fossil, 2. Assign it taxonomically, 3. Revise the Stegosaurian phylogenetic nomenclature, 4. Build a new morphological data matrix, 5. Infer the evolutionary relationships of stegosaurs, and 6. Discuss the taxonomic and evolutionary implications of our results. So they've got a bold ambition here if they're going to propose a new clade, and so they do. It's called Neo-Stegosauria. The new specimens are from Estany de Cologne, RD34 fossil site, which was discovered in 2004 and partially excavated in 2006 and 7, in which 2 stegosaurian specimens were discovered, and they're from, quote, different ontogenetic stages. The first specimen is a partial cranium, MAP 9029, and a mid-cervical vertebra, MAP 9030. These specimens are in collection at the Spanish Museo Aragonés de Paleontología. The new cranial elements from the Villar del Arzobispo Formation from the Kimmeridgian age preserve the, quote, most complete stegosaurian skull discovered in Europe, which consists of the, quote, posterior half of the skull roof, including a fragment of the right prefrontal, both frontals, both postorbitals, both squamosals, the parietal, the supraoccipital, and a possible fragment of the left paraoccipital process. It's not the whole skull, but there's a lot to work with here. Autapomorphies in the specimens lead the researchers to refer it to the species Dacentrurus armatus. This is a cool large stegosaur known from England on specimens from the late 19th century. Through this referral, the authors have added a new cranial autapomorphy for Dacentrurus. And autapomorphies are good because they are diagnostic elements that only particular species exhibit, so they're great for creating phylogenetic maps and identifying species. With that updated phylogenetic chart, their comparative study shed light on the, quote, character evolution of stegosaurian skulls, and it revealed that, quote, Dacentrurus exhibits apomorphic characters more similar to Neostegosaurus, such as Stegosaurus stanops, than to Hyangosaurids, such as Hyangosaurus tabeai. In this distinction, this paper formalizes the clades of Stegosaurinae and Dacentrurinae and introduces a new clade Neostegosauria, which contains both of those families. Their work proposes that Stegosauria, the big family of all stegosaurs, is divided into 2 major clades, Hyangosaurids and Stegosaurids, and the Neostegosaurs are specifically the Dacentrurine and the Stegosaurine families. How does this revision of the Stegosaur family tree affect our understanding of their macroevolutionary course? Quote, the chronogram produced in this study, along with the available evidence, supports that stegosaurs appeared in the early Jurassic, diversified rapidly during the Middle Jurassic, became important constituents of ecosystems at least in the Late Jurassic, and declined in the Early Cretaceous. And the authors make a comment that sort of speaks to a larger complaint about stegosaur studies. Quote, the low support values for most stegosaurian clades in all phylogenetic analyses, including this study, are likely because most stegosaurian taxa are represented by a single partial skeleton and highly incomplete material. Further fieldwork, new fossil discoveries, and comprehensive taxonomic revisions are needed to improve the understanding of stegosaurian evolution. A lot of people want to look up a rare, neat-sounding stegosaur and they don't find it where they expect it in the charts, and it's because they're usually, like most dinosaurs, only known from really lousy fossil remains that are hardly diagnostic. And as a result, researchers don't even put them into larger studies because A, they're not diagnostic enough to confidently put anywhere in the study, so they don't skew the data. So usually they keep the crummy specimens out, the crummy, non-diagnostic, unsubstantiated specimens that could be cool stegosaurs out of larger studies because they don't want to skew the data with bad data, if that makes sense. So one of the stegosaurs that don't always pop up in phylogenetic analyses is Miragaia longicolum, which has a terrific name. Miragaia is the name of a beautiful earth goddess, which is a very pretty name for the locality where the fossils were discovered. And longicolum means that it had a long neck, and it's a strange animal because it unusually evolved more neck bones. Somehow it added vertebrae and developed a much longer neck. It had 17 cervical vertebrae, and guys, that's weird. It's a strange thing for an animal to evolve more bones. Giraffes and people have the same number of vertebrae, just giraffes have way bigger neck vertebrae. But we have the same number. They didn't just evolve more bones, but Miragaia evolved more. But maybe I'm overreacting. It couldn't be that many more bones, could it? Wait, they went from 9 to 17? They almost doubled their neck vertebrae. That's crazy. So immediately, even you and me, we see that there's something up with this dinosaur. The next paper we're looking at is Miragaia longicolum MG4863, New Fossil and Historical Evidence from the Most Complete Stegosaur from Europe, published in the journal Comunicações Geológicas in Outubro, which I'm pretty sure is Portuguese for Communications of Geology, in October 2025. Now, this article does two things with this specimen named MG4863, which was partially described in a paper from 2019, but, quote, due to technical restrictions of mechanical laboratory preparation, could not be completely freed from its matrix or reconstructed. The specimen was, quote, supposedly collected in 1959 at the only location near Antigua de Balea, but, quote, subsequent archival research has resulted in new discoveries which shed important new light on the discovery site, including a field notebook belonging to George Zbizewski containing 4 pages of notes and a short description of the collection site and its stratigraphy. The paper describes how these details helped them correlate a specific locality to the provenance of MG4863, which they say, quote, correspond to the Upper Jurassic, which is the Kimmeridgian-Tithonian Lorena Formation, a siliciclastic unit that represents alluvian fan and fluvio-deltaic environments, intercalations of estuarine and lagoon events. And second, they were able to more closely look at some of those remains and made some important observations. MG4863 is a partial skeleton comprised of 35 vertebrae, 10 cervical, 5 dorsal, and 25 caudal, 2 chevrons, left pelvis, both hind limbs, metacarpals, radial, partial caudal spine, and diverse fragments including the skull, cervical plates, ribs, and various other vertebrae, making it the most complete stegosaur skeleton from Europe, as well as the most complete Dacentrurine discovered to date. A review of the skeleton resulted in, quote, at least 27 morphological differences from the holotype of Dacentrurus armatus, 10 of which are also present in the Miragaia longicolum holotype, supporting that these are distinct species. Now, the preamble I gave about the distinctly different neck of Miragaia makes me think that it should be easy to differentiate from other stegosaurs, but of course, if you don't have distinctive elements like the neck, then that's almost impossible. Until now, this skeleton, this paper says, has 25 morphologies different from Dacentrurus, 10 of which are distinct to a known species of Miragaia. So, suddenly, even without those distinctive extra neck vertebrae, there are lots of new diagnostic characteristics to tell these animals apart. So, thanks to new observations on MG4863, future stegosaur researchers have a better chance of diagnosing whether a specimen is a Miragaia longicolum, thanks to the work done in this publication. We're going to get to more Miragaia stuff and Dacentrurus stuff in a couple papers here. The next paper is kind of cute. It's the smallest known Stegosaurus, published in the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science Bulletin in January 2026. The paper tells us, quote, juvenile dinosaur fossils are uncommon. Very small specimens of stegosaurs are particularly rare. This study describes skeletal remains of an exceptionally small stegosaur from the Morrison Formation, consisting of a partial right ilium, right tibia, a metatarsal, and 2 proximal pedal phalanges. So they're not working with very much, but the specimen DMNH33359, housed at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, represents, quote, the smallest stegosaurus currently known, with an estimated total length of approximately 1.8 meters. The authors say that the specimen is significant because it will help to understand Stegosaurus ontogeny by comparing it to the second smallest juvenile from Dinosaur National Monument and to an adult specimen. The shape of the ilium, the authors say, quote, unambiguously supports assignment to the Stegosauria, and they note that because, quote, the discovery of 2 subadult Stegosaurus stenops at the same quarry and another at the adjacent quarry, quote, supports its attribution to Stegosaurus stenops rather than to Hesperosaurus. Comparative analysis with another juvenile stegosaur specimen, DINO2454, suggests that, quote, major pelvic transformations occur between 1.5 meters and 1.8 meters in body length. And after the smallest Stegosaurus, the next article is titled The Largest Reported Stegosaurid from the Morrison Formation, Upper Jurassic, published in the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science Bulletin in January 2026. So, reading this brings two things to mind. First, relating back to the Juras-Sick Park-Cast, once upon a time I spoke to Dr. Kenneth Carpenter, the adjoint curator at the University of Colorado Museum, about the podcast, who authored the smallest Stegosaurus article from just before. And he said, you know who you should talk to? You should talk to Rebecca Hunt Foster. And I did. Miss Hunt Foster is a vertebrate paleontologist based in Utah, and she was my guest on episode 34, The Main Road. We talked about Morrison Formation dinosaurs, Stegosaurus being Colorado state fossil, and baby Stegosaurs. And guess what? Rebecca is the lead author of the second article here, The Largest Stegosaurus. But this isn't just a small world situation. Not only are these two authors obviously familiar colleagues, both publishing on stegosaurs, but both of these articles are published in the same edition of the same journal. So it's more than a coincidence that the smallest Stegosaurus and the largest Stegosaurus titles conveniently come back to back. I think Carpenter, Hunt Foster, and the editors of the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science Bulletin were having a little fun. And having fun with stegosaurs is right up my alley. So, back to the article. It reports on, quote, a large indeterminate stegosaurid specimen represented by portions of both forelimbs from Uinta County, Utah. Based on our measurements, the humeri of the specimen average 4 centimeters proximodistally longer than those from the second largest stegosaurid specimen and are approximately 38% proxodistally longer than the average for stegosaurid specimens from the Morrison Formation. So, though there are just a few remains of this specimen, comparing them to other known stegosaurs suggests that this is objectively a very big stegosaurus. Quote, the specimen described herein indicates that stegosaurids likely grew to larger sizes than we previously realized and began overlapping in body size dimensionality with some sub-adult sauropods. Sauropods. The Morrison Formation in this area is the homeland for some of the longest and best known sauropods in the world. Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Camarasaurus, Apatosaurus, and lots more, but you get the idea. Stegosaurs lived, maybe in harmony, with these big famous sauropods. The specimen they're working with, FHPR 1095, housed at the Utah Fieldhouse of Natural History State Park Museum, is a partial left coracoid and fused left scapula fragment, both humeri, right radius, and ulna, 2 carpals, right metacarpal 4, and a phalanx which was collected in 1950 from the brushy basin member of the Morrison Formation. This formation, quote, represents streams, floodplains, and other non-arid vegetated plains, which were deposited over 7 million years during the late Oxfordian, Kimmeridgian, and earliest Tithonian periods. FHPR 1095's estimated femur length based on 11 stegosaurid specimens with both a humerus and femur preserved is, quote, approximately 1,436 millimeters in proximodistal length, a length which overlaps with known Morrison sauropod femora, say the authors. When they did the math on a mass estimation for a stegosaur of this size, based on some inferences and estimations and circumference measurements of the humerus and femur, they came up with a very big stegosaurus. Quote, if our scaling estimation methods are correct, then FHPR 1095 is approximately double the body mass of typical average-sized stegosaurids from the Morrison Formation, suggesting that stegosaurids may have grown to even larger body sizes during the late Jurassic than previously realized. The estimated mass of over 7 tons nearly overlaps with subadult Morrison Formation sauropod specimens. This suggests that stegosaurs could have been big enough to rival the size of subadult diplodocids, which is pretty incredible. The next paper has reviewed a bunch of stegosaur specimens, and upon putting those details through the phylogenetic analysis machine, the authors are concluding that there are a lot more occurrences of Dacentrurian stegosaurs in North America than has been previously recognized. The paper Dacentrurian Stegosaurs in North America, New Occurrences from the Upper Jurassic of USA, published in the journal Diversity in February 2026, reviewed fossils from the Upper Jurassic Morrison Formation of Wyoming and Utah that were previously of uncertain specific classification within Stegosauria or Ankylosauria. Quote, namely AMNH492, an isolated dorsal vertebra from the Bone Cabin Quarry, the cervical plate UMNHVP5572, the medium-sized caudal spine, and 2 chevrons from the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry, and a large caudal spine housed at MOAL from the Griffin Ranch Quarry. Now, the cool part of this paper is almost not the Stegosaurus, but the Stegosaur stuff is still cool to know. The authors say they found 5 new occurrences of Dacentrurian Stegosaurs in North America from their research. Quote, after first-hand examination of various paleontological collections from the USA and reviews of the literature, at least 5 more occurrences of Dacentrurians were identified, including 4 in the genus Miragaia. What does that mean? Quote, these findings further support the theorized dinosaur faunal interchange between Europe and North America during the late Jurassic and suggest that the presence of Dacentrurian stegosaurs in late Jurassic North America was not a rare accidental occurrence. Rather, they were an established part of that ecosystem, likely more diverse and widespread than can currently be determined. So, more stegosaurs in more places, which I like the sound of. Are they likely to name new stegosaurs from this material? It would be, for the lack of a better term, unprofessional to name new species based on these remains. Quote, the reduced comparable material in the specimens described here in mostly single isolated skeletal elements mean that these mostly lack autapomorphic features to allow conclusive specific classifications. The exception is the cervical dermal plate UMNH VP5572, which evidences most of an autapomorphy of Miragaia longicolum, but it is more conclusive that it should belong to a species closely related. This also means that the holotype of Miragaia longispinus, UW20503, continues to be the only specimen that unambiguously represents that species currently. Basically, while these are referable to Dacentrurian stegosaurs, the specimens lack distinctive features that are useful in the naming of new species. For a longer discussion on that sort of issue, check out episode 6, Ornithischians, from the fall of 2025, where there was a big paper on Othnielia, Nanosaurus, and Laosaurus, etc., and how the entire base of the small-bodied Ornithischian family tree was an absolute mess because all of the holotypes were inappropriate. They just didn't have enough diagnostic features to serve as useful. In a similar vein, not naming these Dacentrurian specimens saves future researchers from that struggle going forward. Meanwhile, it adds more details for the phylogenetic analysis machine to help narrow down whether Stegosaurian remains are Dacentrurian or Stegosaurian. And making those distinctions is going to be more important going forward now that these authors have confirmed and helped to explain that yes, Dacentrurian stegosaurs are mixed up with the stegosaurines in the late Jurassic of North America. The cool part of this paper is that the authors used these Dacentrurian remains to make a stronger argument for a land bridge between North America and Iberia or Europe. Quote, these new occurrences of Dacentrurinae suggest that Dacentrurines were not a rare or accidental occurrence in the Upper Jurassic Morrison Formation, but rather that this subclade of stegosaurs was an established part of that paleoecosystem. These results also further support the faunal exchange of non-avian dinosaurs between North America and Europe during the late Jurassic and suggest that Dacentrurian stegosaurs had a wider distribution and possibly higher diversity than can be determined currently with the available fossil record. They add that, quote, there is the potential of more occurrences of Dacentrurian stegosaurs being identified with analyses of further fossil collections from the USA. So maybe we'll get a story one day in the future where old bits of stegosaurs get reviewed to see if they may be Dacentrurian or not. I predict we will. I feel like we've covered a lot of Dacentrurus material so far, and perhaps we should review what a Dacentrurus is. It's one of the early discovered dinosaurs from the Kimmeridgian clay of Dorset, England, which is where we get the name Kimmeridgian to label that distinctive age in the late Jurassic. Reportedly, Kimmeridge is the name of the town there, which is in the county of, or ceremonial county of Dorset. This animal was described back in 1874, making it one of the old ones. I have it listed at about 15 feet long, but it looks like it could have grown up to closer to 30 feet in length, which is sizable. So these animals were around the same size as the giant Stegosaurus, but how are they different? From what I can tell, their stance was different. Stegosaurs had shorter forearms and long rear legs, giving them a very pyramidal posture. Dacentrurians had longer forearms, especially their upper arms, or humeri, so right away Dacentrurus is standing very differently than you'd expect. As Stegosaurus do. Next, apparently their bodies were broader than Stegosaurus, indicated by wider back vertebrae and interpreted with wider guts. So perhaps we're looking at a more robust, more girthy animal than Stegosaurus, standing taller with higher upright posture. The iconic broad plates on a Stegosaurus back is another big difference. Dacentrurus would have had smaller plates that taper at the top, and then more spikes than just the 4 on the Thagomizer. Instead, imagine the narrow plates transitioning into spikes midway along the animal's back, and then it having spikes along its hips and tail. And they're very closely related to Miragaia, as described earlier. One description says 12 cervical vertebrae, which is fewer than Miragaia's 17, but definitely more than Stegosaurus' 10. But I put an asterisk on that. I'm just reporting what I'm finding here. I think it should be interpreted as Dacentrurus has a longer neck. I don't know if it conclusively has this number of neck vertebrae or not. So, with that image in mind, our next paper is about Dacentrurus armatus, called A New Specimen of Dacentrurus armatus from the Upper Jurassic of Spain, and its taxonomic relevance in the European Stegosaurian diversity, published in the Zoological Journal of the Linnean Society in June 2024. The paper begins by outlining that Miragaia longicolum and Dacentrurus armatus are sort of the only Dacentrurian stegosaurs we've got, and the authors have, quote, a new relatively complete stegosaurian postcranial skeleton from Villar del Arzobispo Formation. With this new specimen, they run all the stegosaurian remains they've got through a phylogenetic analysis machine, and their results find that, quote, only two stegosaurian species, Stegosaurus stenops and Dacentrurus armatus, are recognized in Europe during the late Jurassic. As well, they say, quote, the species Longispinus from the Morrison Formation is returned to the genus Alcovosaurus. This is sort of contrary to the early reports that there may be more diversity of stegosaurs and dacentrurians, but it goes to show us that the shape of crushed, busted, crumbling fossils of adults and subadults and infants, to compare against the shape of other crushed, busted, crumbling fossils of juveniles and mature samples from totally different continents for the purposes of deciding whether they're the same species or not, has notable margins for error, right? The specimen these authors worked with is CT28 from the San Cristobal site, found in situ in an area of approximately 12 square meters. All the elements were associated or semi-articulated and belong to one individual. CT is the abbreviation for the San Cristobal site itself and are part of a museographic and tourist project called Dinosaur Route, where the fossils are covered by a protective building and can be observed by researchers and visitors in a permanent exhibition. So they're actually still in the field where they were found. Those fossils include a partial stegosaurian skeleton, including 10 free dorsal vertebrae, several dorsal ribs, a synsacrum, and 2 dorsosacral and 5 sacral vertebrae, 6 caudal vertebrae, 2 ilia, a right ischium, a right pubis, a femur, and a tibia. They conclude that this CT28 specimen is, quote, crucial for better understanding of stegosaurian diversity in Europe during the late Jurassic. It exhibits 2 autapomorphies of Dacentrurus armatus, 2 synapomorphies of Miragaia, and at least 1 autapomorphy of Miragaia longicolum. Or in other words, these newly described specimens are distinctly similar to 3 other specimens which describe different animals. Quote, consequently, the presence of this set of characters in the CT28 specimen places it as a key specimen for solving the problematic taxonomy of the European Upper Jurassic stegosaurs. The authors conclude Miragaia longicolum is proposed to be a subjective junior synonym of Dacentrurus armatus, and they say, quote, according to the recommended maximum parsimony criterion, in addition to the type material, 11 specimens from France, Portugal, and Spain, including the newly described specimen, can be assigned to Dacentrurus armatus, and considered part of the hypodyme. These specimens facilitate a better understanding of the anatomy, appearance, and paleobiology of Dacentrurus, and provide valuable information about the range of intraspecific variation. Under this structure, provided by the maximum parsimony criterion, Dacentrurus armatus, quote, can be diagnosed safely on the basis of 10 autapomorphies based on the holotype and referred specimens. The abundance of specimens confidently referred to this species place it as by far the most common plated dinosaur in the European late Jurassic coastal ecosystems. If you lump all these specimens together, the other result is Dacentrurus and Stegosaurus stenops are, quote, the only stegosaurian taxon known from the Kimmeridgian Tithonian of Iberia and Europe. And they throw in at the end that Miragaia longispinus, a North American Miragaia specimen, is, quote, returned to the genus of Alcovosaurus. So it would feel as though this paper that wants to lump Dacentrurians in Europe together, and the previous article about finding lots more Dacentrurians in North America should talk to each other, right? It feels like they've got maybe something they could try to agree on. The next article dates itself in the Early Cretaceous, and it's from Argentina. These are both areas that we have yet to cover in this episode. Stegosaurs are much less common in both this locality and in this era. By the Cretaceous period, stegosaurs were overwhelmingly replaced by the Thyreophoran cousins, the ankylosaurs. The article, New Thyreophoran Remains with Stegosaurian Affinities from the Lower Cretaceous of Argentina, published in the journal Publicación Electrónica de la Asociación Paleontológica Argentina in Febrero 2026, which is February. The article says, quote, during the last decade, several relevant findings of stegosaurian remains from Argentina show a greater diversity than previously thought. And these remains include, quote, the early Stegosaur Early from Los Moles Formation in the Middle Jurassic, and indeterminate stegosaurian remains from the Cañadón Calcáreo and the La Amarga formations, all from the Argentinian Patagonia. So, Stegosaurs from the Middle and Late Jurassic and even the Early Cretaceous are all now known from Argentinian Patagonia. To accompany these, quote, scarce records, the authors report new remains, quote, from the Berriasian and Valanginian Bajada Colorada formation of Neuquén province in Argentina. These remains consist of sacral vertebrae, dorsal ribs, and several osteoderm types, including stegosaurian-like spines. They say that the shape analysis of the sacral vertebrae, the anatomical features, and the morphologic disparity of the osteoderms all, quote, support an assignation to Thyreophora, with affinities to Stegosauria. They admit, quote, it is difficult to approximate the identification of the Bajada Colorada materials to any known group of stegosaurs, revealing that the material resemble Thyreosaurus in some ways, Huayangosaurus in others, and Loricatosaurus in yet other ways. So phylogenetically associating it with a known stegosaur family is challenging. Likewise, associating it with other stegosaur remains from Argentina has other problems. The remains are, quote, very scarce and also present problems for taxonomic identification, as they list issues like they only have, quote, a fragment of a left humerus, and then they have some, quote, cervical vertebrae that show considerable similarity with those of Kentrosaurus, Dacentrurus, and Stegosaurus. To find these remains reinforces the presence of stegosaurs in Argentina and Patagonia during the Lower Cretaceous. The authors add, quote, our explorations and research in Bajada Colorada also support that the historical absence of stegosaurian remains in southern continents was an effect of searching and or preservational biases, as other authors have proposed. They note the oldest known stegosaurus in the world, Eberosaura molensis, was also found in Argentinian Patagonia in the Los Moles formation of the Middle Jurassic of Neuquén province. Quote, this species includes an almost complete skull with basal features for a stegosaur. Thus, despite the scarcity of the remains, stegosaur fossils are represented in Patagonia from its origin and throughout the biochron of this group. And I had a little extra emphasis on this. The Bajocian is 170 million years ago, and to still be kicking in the early Cretaceous 140 million years ago means that although stegosaurs are sparsely known in Argentina, there is a 30 million year record of them surviving there, which is the longest interval known in the world. It's a shame that these remains are always so sparse. The last article we have today focuses on what really is probably the last stegosaur in the world, dating to the Albian age of the early Cretaceous about 113 million years ago. The article, A New Stegosaur from the Late Early Cretaceous of Zuoyun, Shanxi Province, China, was published in the journal Historical Biology in January 2024. The authors named this Yan Beilong ultimus, and they say it, quote, adds diversity and helps elucidate the evolution of stegosaurian dinosaurs. This new stegosaur represents, quote, one of the latest records of stegosaurian taxon in the world. Before the study, there were only 4 valid taxa from the Cretaceous: Peranthodon, Wuerhosaurus, Homhine, Wuerhosaurus ordosensis, and Mongolostegus ex spectabilis. This one is the latest surviving species yet. The holotype SXMG-V00006, housed at the Shanxi Museum of Geology, was uncovered from the Zuoyun Formation. It's comprised of a partial skeleton including 7 dorsal vertebrae, 1 caudal vertebra, the iliosacral block with sacrum and ilium, left ischium, and associated right ilium and pubis. The name of the dinosaur is derived from the term Yanbei, which refers to the north of Yanmen Pass, where the holotype was discovered, and Long is a Chinese word for dragon, and Ultimus is Latin for last of its kind, like ultimate and penultimate, right? Making this the dragon of Yanmen Pass, the last stegosaur. The paper spent a lot of space discussing how they were interested in how the number of fused sacral vertebrae differ between stegosaurs regularly. So fused sacral vertebrae are those which are found between the hip elements, and they're all sort of solidified together into a unit along with the other hip bones, making a solid pivot at the hips in these animals. 3 species had 4 fused sacral vertebrae. In 2 others there were 5. In another stegosaur there were 5 and 6, while some others there were 6. And in another type there were 7. And Yanbeilong there are 4. And apparently by some features observed in the absence of neurocentral sutures on the dorsal vertebrae, the authors were able to identify that this specimen belonged to an adult. So perhaps, as stegosaurs evolved later into its existence, they get fewer fused vertebrae to pivot over their hips. So maybe that's for the sake of flexibility, or who knows? Not I. So Stegosaurs, we kicked off with the article about Thyreophora from Morocco in the Middle Jurassic, and this new creature has surprised researchers by having plates that were most likely laying flat against its back, rather than sticking up as we usually imagine Stegosaurs. It would have appeared more like its Thyreophoran cousins, like Ankylosaurus, than Stegosaurus, necessarily, which is fascinating development for Stegosaurus. Up in the mountains of Morocco, a series of track sites that indicate the region was a complex food web that included maybe Stegosaurs too. There were arthropods and theropods, lots of trees and vegetation, and probably little islands and lots of water in this Middle Jurassic environment where Stegosaurs are known to have lived. A deep investigation into Hesperosaurus plates and spikes suggests that the plates likely evolved from a series of calcium storage during their evolution into the Thyreophoran family tree, along with Ankylosaurs, and then exapted those deposits into defensive structures, which would be further exapted over the millennia for display purposes, perhaps thermoregulatory purposes, and for combat, both against predators and intraspecies. There's a new clade of Neostegosaurs that has been formalized containing Dacentrurines and Stegosaurians in the big family tree based on a phylogenetic analysis of the new Dacentrurus skull found in Spain. This study revises the Stegosaur macroevolutionary course and continues to suggest Stegosaurs appeared in the early Jurassic, diversified rapidly during the Middle Jurassic, became important constituents of ecosystems at least in the late Jurassic, and declined in the early Cretaceous. A new Portuguese paper has published 25 new morphological traits on a specimen of Miragaia, so that it will be much easier to diagnose going forward, and what's more, those features are all from the most complete Stegosaur specimen ever unearthed in Europe. Miragaia could become one of the best known Stegosaurs of Europe, thanks to multiple specimens, and one which is so complete. But we still haven't heard of other Stegosaurs with up to 17 cervical vertebrae yet. As well, the smallest Stegosaur specimen was uncovered, showing that as these animals matured, pelvic regions went through, quote, major transformations at around the time they reached the body length of about 1.8 meters. But more impressively, the study of some Stegosaur leg bones excavated in the 1950s suggests that, if the estimations are correct, that Stegosaurs could have grown much bigger than previously expected, upwards of 7 tons, rivaling the size of subadult diplodocids. We have another article that reviewed Stegosaurian remains from North America and discovered that a bunch of samples were in fact Dacentrurian Stegosaurs, not Stegosaurian Stegosaurs, which suggests that Dacentrurian Stegosaurs were a bigger part of the paleo ecosystem during the late Jurassic in North America, and that there must also have been more robust faunal interchange between North America and Europe during that period as well. And this brings to mind the Allosaurus europaeus versus Allosaurus fragilis quarrels from episode 5, from the summer of 2025. And that said, other papers review loads of Dacentrurian data and feel like there may be less diversity. We read one paper that reviewed a fairly well-preserved new specimen from Iberia, and it's helped connect the dots on a few specimens, making Miragaia longispinus actually an Alcovosaurus in North America, and really narrowed down the possible diversity of Stegosaurs in Europe during the Kimmeridgian Tithonian age to Stegosaurus stenops and Dacentrurus armatus. And this also brings to mind that Allosaurus europaeus versus Allosaurus fragilis quarrel from episode 5. They seem to be not quite agreeing on the validity of naming different species, although they be on different continents. In terms of early Cretaceous Stegosaurs, some remains from Argentinian Patagonia have been evaluated to probably be Stegosaurian in nature, which is exciting because it suggests that although most Stegosaurian remains from Argentina are sparse and few and far between Isobarosaura and these early Cretaceous fossils, the entirety of the biochron, which is the known span of time that a family of animals is known to have been alive, is represented in Argentinian rocks. So overlook the importance of Argentinian Stegosaurs at your own peril. There is definitely a latent story there waiting to be told. And the latest surviving Stegosaur ever found is named Yan Beilong, and she was found in China. It's an exciting find that extends the believed existence of some of my favorite animals of all time. And after that, I hope that you are now feeling more caught up on what's been published on Stegosaurs lately. Thanks for tuning in to Dinosaurs Lately. If you'd like to find links to the materials discussed on today's show, you can visit dinosaurslately.blogspot.com, which is a companion piece to the Dinosaurs Lately podcast. Special thanks to everyone who tuned in. A special thanks to Dr. Kenneth Carpenter, who recommended I speak with Rebecca Hunt Foster, and he also shared some pictures, which I put up in the slideshow. And to Ben Chrysler at the Dinosaur mailing list for all his contributions that help makes wrangling all these news stories together possible. Remember, I have a PDF on Ankylosaurs. If you'd like a copy, you can send me an email and I'll forward it over to you, no charge. If you'd like to request a family of dinosaurs to focus on for an upcoming episode, you can drop me a line on that too. So how do you do that? Here's how. Dinosaurs Lately is a companion show to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park, and also that too. If you'd like to be a guest on that show, you can reach me at ryansrogers@gmail.com. These podcasts are part of the Spring Chickens banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chickens Funny Pages, Tomb of the Undead graphic novel, the Second Lapse graphic novelettes, The Infantry, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. You can find links to all that baggage in the show notes or by visiting the schickens.blogspot.com. And you can connect and follow on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers, on YouTube by searching for the Juras-Sick Park-Cast podcast, on Tumblr at Mr. Rogers22, on X at RogersRyan22, or on Blue Sky at RogersRyan22.bsky.social. So thanks for tuning in. I hope you're feeling all caught up on Stegosaurs for now. Until next time.